Welcome to the Adrenal Fatigue Podcast. We are so excited to welcome you to our very first episode. Yay!
Yay! Woo! So exciting.
Finally happening. I'm Angela Racchio, life coach and co-founder of HealYourAdrenalFatigue.com, and with me today is
Danielle Zeese. So I'm the other co-founder and team nutritionist. And so today what we want to talk about is the progression of adrenal fatigue, also known as burnout, also known as hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis dysfunction, which is a mouthful, but we're going to talk about it in detail. And our goal with the discussion today is really to give you some clarity as to the different stages of adrenal fatigue, what they look like, what they feel like, and most importantly, what you can do about it. So to help us do so, we're really thrilled to be joined by our good friend and colleague, Dr. Holly German.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
So Dr. Holly German is our in-house naturopathic doctor at HealYourAdrenalFatigue.com, which, for those of you who are new and just meeting us for the first time, is a collaboration of health professionals who have come together to create a global recovery movement, a movement that is helping hundreds around the world overcome adrenal fatigue and balance their hormones in a holistic way. So Dr. Holly is a naturopathic doctor who's been specializing in functional medicine for women's health, fertility, hormone balancing, GI imbalances, mental emotional health. She's been doing this for over a decade. She's had private practices in California and now Colorado, and now she practices telemedicine all around the world. She is amazing. And we're really honored.
She's a rock star.
Yeah, that she's a part of our team here at Heal Your Adrenal Fatigue and that she's joining us on our very first podcast episode. So,
yay.
To introduce her before we begin, this podcast is brought to you by Fatigued to Fabulous, our signature 10-week adrenal fatigue recovery program. It's a step-by-step system to balance your hormones, boost your adrenals, heal your gut and your nervous system all at the same time so you can get your life back. So to learn more, you can go to www.hyaf.ca/get help. So welcome again, Dr. Holly. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Before we jump into the different stages, can you quickly tell us a little bit about integrative and naturopathic medicine for those who might be listening who are new to it?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I think a lot of people find integrative and naturopathic medicine when they have symptoms of adrenal fatigue because it's one of the approaches that actually addresses adrenal fatigue a lot more holistically and comprehensively than conventional medicine does. So a lot of people see integrative medicine as an alternative, but really it is a holistic approach. So one of the differences is just the experience of the patient when you come into a naturopathic doctor or call in. We spend a lot more time figuring out the root causes of your symptoms. We also take into account things like mental and emotional health and obviously physical health, how you're feeling about your life. You know, all of those things do affect your health. So that's what I mean by holistic, is that we're looking at all of that. The other probably big difference is in what we use for treatment. So we rarely prescribe medications, although sometimes when appropriate, we will do that. But typically we try to work more with diet, nutrition, lifestyle. Sometimes we'll use herbs, sometimes supplements when necessary. We also do a lot more in-depth kinds of testing and evaluation if appropriate. So that's something we'll be talking about today a lot on this podcast.
Well, thank you for sharing, because I feel like when I was struggling with adrenal fatigue, there was many years that I went without knowing what was going on. And finally, when I was able to see, it wasn't actually a naturopathic doctor, but an integrative doctor, it was like I finally started getting answers. So it was just like, I'm just so thankful for, this approach. And it was actually what turned everything around for me, because once I was able to look at it from a different perspective and have an integrative doctor who was working with me, it only really took me, a very short time really to heal after I really knew what was going on. So anyway, I think that's
awesome.
Helpful for people to hear too. Great. So, all right. So can you tell us, or walk us through the different stages of adrenal fatigue or adrenal exhaustion?
Sure. So I just use a 3-stage system because I think it's simpler. There's different systems out there, but if you can think of adrenal fatigue as kind of a trajectory over time, then stage 1 is typically the earlier phase for people. And that's when people are going to feel more wound up, oftentimes more stressed. During that phase, they may feel like they're more wired. Sometimes people just feel energetic and even on top of their game. But really, they're kind of fueling themselves with adrenaline and cortisol, which isn't a sustainable thing, even when it feels good. When it doesn't feel good, it'll lead to insomnia. It can cause diarrhea or other digestive issues. If you think of your system as being revved up, I like to think about like how you may feel before something that you're nervous about. So for me, it would be like public speaking, or if I have a big event the next day, the night before, I'll have a hard time sleeping. I'll feel like I can't focus real well because my brain's not, it's flooded with cortisol. So I just kind of feel like I'm like a hummingbird a little bit. That's the energy of it. So that's stage 1. Usually people don't seek help in stage 1 because even if they're feeling a bit wired, it's still not, they're able to live their lives most of the time. And so I don't often see people in that stage, but usually when I'm talking with someone and they're in stage 2 or 3, we can kind of go back in time and then review the time in their life when they were likely at stage 1, when maybe they had a big life change or, moved across country, went to medical school, something like that. That could be when someone would go through stage 1. Stage 2 is when, you can kind of go further down the timeline now, and maybe they still have some stress going on. Maybe the stress has lightened up, but they feel a mix of often feeling tired and wired, sometimes in the same hour, sometimes in the same week, where they'll feel some of those symptoms of being revved up, like I described, but also some symptoms of feeling exhausted. So they may feel like they have some really good days and they're able to exercise and accomplish whatever they want. And then other days they feel like they can hardly get up. And on the low days, they may also feel some depression, sometimes some just lack of interest in whatever they're trying to do. So in this stage, I find that a lot of people will, on their good days, make a bunch of plans. And then on the next day when they're not feeling so good, they want to cancel all the plans because it's just hard to maintain any level of consistent, healthy energy during the second phase. And during the third phase, it's more of just consistently feeling low. So in the third phase, that's when most people will come in to see me because they're feeling like they're no longer able to easily accomplish the things that they want to accomplish during their days, to meet their work demands or family demands or both. Fatigue is more significant and it's not necessarily alleviated by rest. There still can be some symptoms of being wired. So it might be that they're exhausted and they have insomnia. So some of that can still be going on. And really, symptomatically, we go through all of this, and I kind of have a checklist that I go through with people to try to kind of get a sense of the stage that they're in. But one of the best ways to really confirm that and to understand it more deeply is to do some lab testing. And I know we're going to talk about that here in a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great breakdown.
I love that you talked about the symptoms. I love the flood of cortisol that we've all felt, we have our brains, full of cortisol. I like that, that idea.
Unfortunately, it's a familiar feeling for most of us.
Yes. And I think a lot of times when you're describing stage 2, also that kind of up and down, that roller coaster kind of, we always talk about, and a lot of our clients are coming to us, and especially right now in our membership program, that feels like a lot of people are there, right, Danielle? Where we're constantly having good days and then having some down, so.
And it's interesting because when you were explaining the symptoms and the signs of stage 1, I think that a lot of people that we work with, and I even know it with my history, like that was my normal for a really long time. And I think, like you said, like people aren't necessarily knowing that it's a time that they need to seek help, because you don't necessarily feel bad, but at the same time, that's kind of how so many of us are used to living in that like really overdriven state that frankly is not sustainable.
Yep.
So
it's also this is like a whole other conversation, but it's very culturally supported to be that way.
Oh yeah.
Adrenal fatigue, so
such a good
even
point.
if maybe kind of transitioning from stage 1 to stage 2, in that phase when people maybe start feeling more tired, the answer is usually just stimulants, right? So well, I'm feeling kind of tired this morning, I just need an extra cup of coffee or whatever
I stimulate all day, I find, and we stimulate all day with these adaptogens or caffeine, and then we wonder why we can't calm down at night, right? Well, at least I used to wonder that, like, why can't I sleep? But I had like 6 coffees today. Maybe not that much, but like I think that that's actually something that people go through. So it's fascinating to me. Thank you.
Yeah.
So while we're on this topic, like how important would you say it is to know your stage when it comes to your recovery? Because I do see this in our community as something where people kind of feel stuck when they feel like they don't know. And when it comes to knowing, like how important is it to have that clarity, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's important. I've been in practice for about 10 years. And in that time, I've kind of gone through different ways of approaching adrenal fatigue. And there have been times when I've not done testing, usually because of a patient's preference. And I always feel like it backfires. I think one of the reasons it's important is because it's validating to see something on paper, to see that this explains symptoms. So many times adrenal fatigue is kind of an invisible illness. And it's one of those things that, because the conventional medical community doesn't talk much about adrenal fatigue, or if they do, they use different terminology for it. And it's hard to get anyone to listen and understand what you're going through. It's really helpful for people to see on paper, like, no, this is real. It's a real thing, and you can diagnose it and get information about it. And the staging clinically, it's very helpful for me to see, let's say, stage 1 versus stage 3, for example, the treatment and the protocol, all of it, some of it will be the same, but a lot of it is really very different. And I know we'll talk about this when we talk about the testing too, but stage 3, for example, a lot of other hormones are going to be affected, and that will cause some of the same symptoms as just uncomplicated adrenal fatigue, but also some additional symptoms. And it's not always easy to tell just hearing about symptoms and history, even after the hour that I spend, getting symptom details and as much as I can understand it, it's not always clear which hormones are at play. And so when you really want to dive into getting the specifics of supporting the hormones that are affected and supporting the whole person, the staging is really helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, that's powerful, because I do see that sometimes people, they get stuck on maybe knowing where to get started or trying to figure out where to get started with their recovery. And I think you're right. Getting that clarity, and even just like you said, getting that clarity to know that it's not in your head.
Yes.
See, like that there is a dip happening there. And maybe that's why you feel so anxious at that time of day every day. It makes it all real. And then you can target it so much more specifically and really, I think, streamline your recovery efforts in terms of timing and efficacy. So I agree. I think that that's going to be really helpful for our listeners. Thank you.
Yeah.
But are there any, like, on that note, are there any like red flags or telltale symptoms? And I know there's probably many, but are there any that would jump out at you as like a stage 1 symptom or a stage 2, stage 3? I know you touched on this a little before.
Yeah. So I would say, classic stage 1 is probably insomnia. In that stage, there's going to be more likely, and I don't mean insomnia. Maybe some people hear that and think they're up all night. But I mean, if you have trouble falling asleep, if it takes more than 15, 20 minutes to fall asleep, if you wake up in the night and again have trouble falling asleep, maybe you eventually do, but you're missing out on valuable sleep time because of that. That can be insomnia. I would say, like, not all digestive symptoms would be classic for stage 1, but in stage 1, it's often more like the loose bowels, fast digestive transit time, which means when you eat, like, you have to have a bowel movement very soon after because the food is just kind of not getting processed at all. Stage 1 also, there can be more like palpitations or cardiovascular symptoms. On like a bigger picture, but maybe more kind of esoteric note, it's a sense of just not really being able to drop into yourself and not feel grounded, just feeling kind of, all I can think of is describe it as wired or revved up. And I don't know if that really translates, but when you know what it is to feel that way and then know what it is to feel other ways, I think it does make sense. I hope
it makes sense to me. Yeah.
I think it was like, for me, it was like, for years, I didn't even know how it was to feel calm. And then, I started meditating, and that was where I was like, oh, wow, this is a whole nother.
Right.
I haven't really experienced this feeling. I've just been revved up for like a decade. I didn't even know it.
And so many of us do that. And I even, in my intake, we talk a lot about anxiety, and so many people their knee jerk is to say like, no, I don't experience anxiety. But then I ask, well, how often do you experience calm? What do you do to help yourself feel calm? When throughout the day are you feeling calm? And they're like, well, I don't really feel calm either. Like, well, then you might be feeling anxious physiologically. Maybe it's not that you're nervous, but your nervous system is revved up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to that because I feel like I didn't truly understand what anxiety was. Like I thought of it as one way, just not like, you think of social anxiety or whatnot, but for me, anxiety presented itself in like a perpetual need to always be doing stuff and like not being able to relax, but not necessarily feeling fearful in the way that maybe I would expect. And so, yeah, I think that you're right that a lot of people don't even realize that it's anxiety. And it comes back to that being our normal, right?
Yeah. I think a lot of us, and I know this is a pattern that I can easily fall into, even knowing all of this, is that I prefer to feel that way a lot of the time, and if I do get stuck in a pattern of it, and maybe it feels a little bit stressful, but more it just feels like massively productive, which for me, a type A, kind of perfectionistic person, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, we thrive on it.
Like I'm crashing, so
until we don't.
I do. Exactly. Yeah. So it's the learning curve of knowing when I'm like tapping into that current and how long I can safely stay in there without harming myself. 'Cause like I said, it's really not always a bad feeling or a feeling that people would come to the doctor for. So it's tough.
A good point. Yeah. I love the discussion. And I really like going back to what you mentioned about insomnia and sort of really getting clear about what insomnia is and your perspective. I just really think that was helpful. And I think I've never really heard it like that. I do think of insomnia, I think of like insomnia as the more severe, I guess, like, yeah, you're up for 4 or 5 hours a night. But it's interesting to hear that it could be sort of a lesser.
Because even when the symptoms are milder, it's often a sign that when you are sleeping, your sleep quality isn't as deep and not as refreshing. So it can set you up for health problems down the line.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, great. So, so if, let's say I'm a patient and I haven't been tested before, but I know something is off, and I definitely don't know my stage, but I know that I'm, tired and not really feeling right. What would you recommend as a starting point for me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think one is to get a medical workup, whether that's with a naturopathic doctor or functional doctor. But a lot of times the symptoms of adrenal fatigue are vague, and it could be other things. So that would really be the first step, is to rule out, could it be something else, right? Like, could it be some kind of chronic virus? Could it be hypothyroid? Could you be anemic? When I do a workup with someone, I kind of have one foot in each world medically. So I'm thinking about all the stuff that a conventional doctor would be thinking about and wanting to rule in or out. And then also, is it hormonal? Is it adrenal related? So even though you may be going down the adrenal path and so many of the symptoms might match, I just want to stress that you don't want to leave out all the other evaluation. Maybe you have chronic low blood pressure. I mean, there's at least a dozen things that it could be that might look like adrenal fatigue. So then the next step is to find a practitioner or a group of lovely practitioners like this group right here that can support you and give you insight on what's the next best step for you as an individual. So part of the reason that when I start working with someone, I always offer kind of a meet and greet appointment first, is just so that I can get clear on kind of where they are in the process, what makes sense for them to do now, and if that's something that I can help them with, or if they should see some other practitioner first. So it's somewhat individualized, but I think seeking help is an important part, because adrenal fatigue, as you know, probably anyone listening here knows, it can be overwhelming, especially when you have adrenal fatigue, to piece together your own protocol. If you're trying to guess what stage you're in, all of that, it more often than not just prolongs the suffering to try to do that alone.
Yeah, we see a lot of that, right? Like with our Facebook community and that free support group, it's people are, and we're all trying to get information online, right? We can just, and so I think sometimes I just remember it for me, it was like, okay, I'll try this supplement now. And so, but we're not really we're hearing a few, stories on Facebook. And so we're, feeling like that might be, okay, that actually sounds like me. Maybe I'll try that. And then, we're sort of disappointed when it doesn't seem to do the trick. And so, I think we just see this a lot. And so, I mean, just going out there and getting professional support from people that are experts, and specialize in this is a really a good point. And I think it's, like you said, it's kind of just prolonging if, you really don't have the support that you need. It can be just a lot.
It's a lot. And it can be really discouraging when you don't respond to that herb that person online recommended, and it can feel defeating, and then you've lost $30 again. Mm-hmm. I think we've all done that at some point, right?
Totally. 100%.
All for it is good.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is interesting because I know this is something that a lot of us want to do, right? We want to go and we want to buy the next hottest supplement. We want to try this, whatever it is that we may have heard of. But I think, and I talk a lot about this in the work that I do, and I know that we've done a blog and stuff on it before, but when it comes to knowing your stage and when it comes to choosing supplements, sometimes you can actually kind of create more harm in some scenarios if you're not choosing correctly. So this is why this whole idea of understanding your stage is so important. And Holly, I would love your input on this when it comes to picking supplements for the different stages of adrenal fatigue, when it comes to using herbs, or when it just comes to starting with supplements, where do you start to keep things safe? Like, is there a good rule of thumb that you can think of off the top of your head, or do you have any thoughts on this? I'd love to hear, or we'd love to hear them.
Yeah. So, okay. Gosh. Okay. So short answer to a big question. I'll try. So I actually wouldn't start with herbs. If someone has adrenal fatigue symptoms, I would first start with diet and lifestyle. So kind of reevaluating some of the behaviors and mindsets that we've talked about, and Angela, this is where you are a rock star, it's just helping people to identify if they've been in a long-term frazzled state, or if they're choosing to stay in a frazzled state, then looking at how to unpack some of that. That's huge. So whether or not you're on herbs in any stage of adrenal fatigue, that is an important part. And then, like I said, I think diet would be the next step. So Danielle, this is your zone here, right? So adrenal fatigue, because it has so many different components and so many different hormones are affected, the diet part is huge. And sometimes it's little stuff like, oh, I'm not eating 2 out of 3 meals in a day. Like eat 3 meals, so some of it can be done even when you're tired or overwhelmed. Drinking water, resting, sleeping when you can. So a lot of it, really, I think of those as like, those are foundational. And if they're not in place, then you can stack 1,000 herbs on top of that and they can be the best herbs you can find, but it's really not going to be helpful. So
yeah,
getting
I've seen that in practice.
Yeah. And the funny thing is it's that stuff that can be hardest for people, like especially with our medical model, the way it is now, people often come to me just wishing there was just a pill and an herb that could fix it. And I would love to provide that. But
Right.
adrenal fatigue is just not that simple. Most illnesses are not, right? So if the foundational pieces are there, and this hypothetical person is not on medications, they've ruled out any other concerning health conditions, they clearly feel like it is adrenal fatigue, then I think starting with some of the herbs that I would consider more neutral adaptogens. So there are some formulas that I like for this. There's one adrenal formula by Vitanica. Do you want me to go into this level of detail, or?
Yeah, I think that's okay. Or just maybe if it's a favorite, you can.
Yeah. So I'd say
I
like the Vitanica Adrenal Herbal Blend and the Gaia Adrenal Herbal Blend.
Okay. And we'll link those in the show notes for our
Okay.
listeners.
Awesome. Yeah. I think both of those contain adrenal herbs, or they're called adaptogens, that aren't going to be too stimulating. Sometimes when people are just flat out exhausted, the adrenal herbs that will help them get over that hump are going to be ones that are a little bit more stimulating, but you have to use some caution with those. So I don't recommend those without knowing a whole lot about what's going on with the person. And then they're also, on the other side, they're not too sedating. So if someone is really revved up, anxious, insomniac kind of person, they probably need more of the calming adrenal adaptogens. But both of those formulas are kind of like middle of the road, I would say.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But would you say, so just to kind of like summarize that up for everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. When it comes to making the first moves to help support yourself, instead of going towards a supplement first, we're working on reducing stress on all levels. So that's emotionally, like mentally, physically, and then nutritionally too. So opting for better foods. And generally, this is where I start when it comes to supplements, before even jumping into herbs, like looking at, are you getting those basic essential nutrients?
Yes.
Which might be, I think, a safe place for, I'm curious if you agree, I think it's a safe place for a lot of people to just start, like the magnesium, the vitamin C, just those essential things that our adrenals eat up or love up so much.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. I think anyone who starts with the foundational stuff like that will benefit without potentially causing harm. With, I think of it as kind of different levels of medicine. I think herbs are just a stronger medicine. So there is potential there for some harm to be done if they're not used correctly.
Thank you. It's great to clear that up.
Mm-hmm.
I hope you guys out there listening are taking notes, because I feel like this is really worthwhile information and will save you a lot of money. So,
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
So the best way to truly understand like, so do you feel the best way to understand your stage and is testing, and what does that look like for people that, you know, aren't familiar with the testing, and what's the best test out there kind of thing?
So
That was kind of a two-part question. Sorry.
yeah. So yes, I think testing is wise. And I like to do, so I do a few different kinds of testing depending on what hormones I'm looking at. But the more comprehensive route, and the one that I think would benefit the most people, is called Dutch testing. So it's a comprehensive hormone test that's done through dried urine. So it's a test that is nice in a lot of ways. So very simply, it's convenient, so you can do it at home. It also tests the largest number of hormones and their metabolites. So it actually tells us, you know, not just what your body is producing, but that may stay bound up. So a lot of blood tests, for example, will test your total cortisol. Total cortisol does not tell us much at all. It doesn't tell us what your free cortisol is. Think of free being the kind that your body can actually use. So when you test it in the urine, it actually tells us what the free cortisol is in the metabolite. And I like it because it tests the levels throughout the day. So there's different samples that look at 4 different times of day. And so we're trying to get a sense of your cortisol rhythm when we do that, which is much more valuable than just a one-time blood draw at the doctor's office. You know, if you have severe adrenal fatigue, then starting with blood work is a good idea, right? So your primary care, your endocrinologist can look to see maybe you have something beyond adrenal fatigue. Maybe it's Cushing's disease or Addison's disease. Those are adrenal diseases where your cortisol is at extreme ends of the spectrum. We're not talking about that, you know, so it's possible that that needs to be done and ruled out. But when we've ruled those out and we're looking more clearly at adrenal fatigue, then the urinary test is a better option because it's much more sensitive. This test also tests the other hormones that are affected by your adrenal hormones. So in addition to cortisol, your adrenals produce a handful of other hormones. They're tiny little glands and they do so much. It's really amazing. One of them is DHEA. And so in kind of further progression of adrenal fatigue, so more like in stage 3, sometimes in stage 2, the sex hormones that are, I think of it as like downstream from DHEA, can also become, usually it's depleted, but sometimes they're just out of whack. Okay. So the Dutch test will give us a sense of what the sex hormones are as well. And it can be used for men and women. So it's nice to see, you know, people think of testosterone as a male hormone and estrogen as a female hormone. That is really a myth. So this test looks at different types of estrogen and different types of testosterone, as well as some progesterones and the adrenal hormones. So it's really a very informative test. And it can help customize your treatment so much more than just like we talked about, kind of starting with the foundational stuff and the basic herbs. You know, if someone has adrenal fatigue and depleted DHEA and depleted estrogen, for example, that's the kind of patient that, you know, I see a lot of fertility patients. That woman's going to have a very hard time becoming pregnant. She may not even have regular menstrual cycles. And most gynecologists or primary care doctors are never going to say your infertility is because of your adrenal fatigue, right? They're going to send her off to IVF and these really invasive, intense treatments. So it applies to a lot of different health concerns, but getting the big picture kind of helps to dial it in and get a lot more specific with treatment.
So worthwhile.
Agreed.
So a lot of integrative and naturopathic doctors these days will know about the Dutch test if you do want to know more. But we actually offer Dutch testing through our website with international shipping. And our test package actually comes with a review with one of our in-house professionals. So we walk you through the results and we guide you in the right direction based on what those results say. So I just wanted to note that for anybody looking to break through the blocks of not really knowing, and for those who are looking for more clarity. And I will link in the show notes so you can learn more about the test kit that we offer there.
Taking away the guesswork is so empowering for so many people. And we're really grateful for you, Holly, for being here with us today and helping us clear up a lot of these common questions that I think so many people wonder about. And I think that there's been a lot of good stuff that is going to help progress people forward into their recovery. So thank you.
And so many of our clients who want that confirmation, go to you and they just love working with you. So we love having her as a part of our team.
Thank you. It's an honor.
So we'll tell you all how you can find her too in just a moment. So
thanks, ladies.
So before we go, once again, this very first episode of the Adrenal Fatigue podcast has been brought to you by Fatigue to Fabulous, our signature 10-week immersive adrenal recovery program. So this program is not about doing a ton of different things like maybe you're used to that aren't necessary. Fatigue to Fabulous tells you the exact few things you need to do to focus on and to be consistent with so that you can catapult your recovery. It's about saving you time and energy and your sanity so you can start seeing real results and get your energy and your life back. You deserve it. So once again, you can learn more at www.hyaf.ca/gethelp. And you can learn more about Dr. Holly on our website too, or at drhollygerman.com, which we will definitely link below. Is there anywhere else that you would want to be found, Holly? Like your Instagram, or you want to share that?
My Instagram is Dr. Holly German ND.
Dr. Holly.
She has some cute posts. You guys want to follow her for sure.
Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Holly.
Thanks, Dr. Holly.
This was fun.
Yeah, it was. And thank you, all of you out there, for listening to episode 1 of the Adrenal Fatigue podcast. We'll see you next time.
And before we close out the show, we wanted to let you know about a free workshop that we actually put out after recording this podcast. And the workshop is all about how to use supplements to properly fuel your adrenal recovery. And we dive into a lot of the stuff we just started to touch on during this podcast. Things like how to use different supplement formulas for the different stages of adrenal fatigue, where to start when it comes to supplements, where to go when you hit roadblocks, and how to avoid really common mistakes that we see people making all the time in this industry when it comes to choosing supplements. We have linked the registration link in the show notes, so you can totally join the next workshop there. And we can't wait to see you in one of the classes. Thank you so very much for tuning in to this episode of the Adrenal Fatigue podcast. If you liked what you heard, please leave us a review on iTunes, and don't forget to subscribe. And if you know someone who's struggling and could use some support with balancing their hormones and overcoming adrenal fatigue once and for all, please share this podcast with them. You can visit us at www.healyouradrenalfatigue.com to learn more about us and our adrenal fatigue recovery revolution.